Hi, this is Justin Colletti. You may know me from Sonic Scoop, but today I am on the Plugin Alliance channel, and we have the privilege of talking to one Maor Appelbaum today. Maor, in case you don't know him, is a world-renowned mastering engineer. He has worked with the likes of Yes, Dream Theater, Sepultura, Meatloaf, Faith No More, and so many more. And the reason we're talking to him today is he has a new plugin coming out called The Oven that he was instrumental in the design of. It was a collaboration between him and Hendyamps, and it is a Colorbox, kind of an EQ, kind of a saturator. It does a lot of stuff, but I'll tell you one thing. Pretty much anyone who's tried it, who I've talked to, says it's a lot of fun to use, and it's really easy to get cool sounds out of. So really excited to talk to Maor about it today. Maor, how are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to explain a bit about it, and I brought my dog. He wanted to give some input too.
All right. I'm sure Pato has ways of using this that you and I can only imagine. And I'm sure he can hear things that it can do that neither of us can hear. So he'll be indispensable input today, I'm sure.
We made the sizzle knob with him.
I'm sure he's also a big fan of the oven, and maybe after today, some more of the people listening will be a fan of it. If you haven't tried it out, go over to plugin-alliance.com where you can try out this plugin for free for 2 weeks. But I really want to talk to Maor because the controls on this plugin are unlike anything else you've probably seen on any other piece of software or hardware before. It has controls like temp and bake and broil and all sorts of things that don't seem very audio-y. But everyone I've talked to so far who has tried this thing has just gone in, started turning knobs and gone, whoa, this is cool. So a couple quick questions for you right out of the gate, Maor. Number one, what does this plugin do? What's the overall design? Is it a saturator? Is it an EQ? How do you think about what the oven does and what it's for?
Well, I would start with, let's look at it as an enhancer, okay? That can go to different directions, from tone shaping, kind of a EQ that has a very nice, smooth, and open sound, to saturation and coloration. But it's not one thing. It's a combination of things together that they're very interactive. So it gives a lot of flexibility and versatility to the unit, because you can just use a bit of coloration and then some tone shaping on the EQ side, or you can saturate a bit and coloration and tone shaping. So you're looking at a lot of things that can be controlled, from a solid state coloration to saturation in different amounts, to tube coloration and saturation, to just a very nice sounding EQ that you can just apply that, a 3-band EQ plus an upper section sizzle band, right, that we call it warm air.
Interesting.
Because it's smooth air.
Yeah, and you have these controls on it, like sizzle. There's an electric versus gas control. There's the, bake and broil and all these other kind of cooking terminology for the controls here, instead of things like frequency and boost and cut. Why did you go for this kind of unusual naming convention for the controls? What's the advantage of that approach?
Well, I'll give you an analogy to music. Let's say you meet someone and he tells you about his band, and he says, oh, we have very melodic and groovy music. Now, do you know what that means? If I tell you it's groovy and melodic? No, right? But you probably know it's not going to be ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, right? You know it's groovy, so you're thinking of something, sure, right? You have something in mind. But you'll only understand what it is once you listen to it. So the analogy to this thing is that if I tell you frequencies, it's not going to work right, because it's super broad and it's super interactive. So one frequency number that I'll give you won't represent what you're going to actually get from it. So you really need to listen to it. So me coming to you and saying, hey, it's a groovy and melodic band, well, you probably know now it's not going to be ta-ta-ta. It's going to be maybe something more groovy and funky, whatever, but you'll have to put your ears to it. And that's really what I want people to do. I don't want them to think with numbers, because the numbers here don't correlate exactly to the result. What will correlate to the result would be when you're experimenting with it and you're happy with the sound, that structure that you just created to the sound, like the tonality, that's what correlates with basically what you brought into it, knowing the controls, but not knowing exactly what the numbers and frequencies do. Because to me, they don't really matter what they do under the hood. It matters what the result is. And I think it's enough to know 10% of this to get results. Even 2% is enough, because you can get tones in like 15 seconds. You just move one knob and you're like, oh, wow, it brings it forward. Oh, wow, there's depth, there's width. You don't need much technicalities to get results with this. And it's like getting better sounds quicker, which is not the normal way to work, right? Usually to get really good sounds, you don't work that quick. It takes time, but here it's a shortcut.
Yeah, I love that idea. And it's so interesting that a mastering engineer is the guy who came up with this, that the controls are about being broad and effective and immediately interesting. And exactly what you described is exactly the feedback I've heard of from anyone who's tried this, which is just you start turning knobs and you can just listen and kind of get good results. So we're not trying to be precise. We're trying to be broad, and low, mid, and top burn is good enough for these purposes. And then you have this additional kind of sizzle control, which is a brightness control. And one thing I just want to give people a general idea on is that there's more than one type of saturation in here, right? You have both a solid state section and a tube section. Can you give us a sense for how those two sections differ in this design and why you would push either or both of them?
Well, first of all, I want to mention that, coming to this from a mastering perspective, I wanted a tool that could be subtle enough to use for mastering and also for mix bus, but also aggressive enough to use on instruments and vocals and other sources that you want to really go in and alter. So I would call it a mastering grade processor, because you can work with it with subtleties without it being too much, and you can grow from it, upwards, where, I need to really go in and change the sound, manipulate it. You can go far with it. This is a collaboration between me, Maor Appelbaum Mastering, but also with Chris Henderson from Hendyamps, who's a brilliant designer and builder. And this took us a bunch of years to get the right form of how we wanted, and a ton of prototypes and going back and forth till we nailed it. And the same thing happened with the plugin. We worked really hard to get this happening there. Now, when you ask me about the saturation, so there are a lot of saturation hardware units and plugins out there, and they all have their own benefits. Each one works on a different range or different type of sound. In this case, we weren't looking for a saturation per se saturation. We were looking at the abilities of saturation to enhance the sound, but not become the sound. So it is a Mojo box. It has the saturation, but you don't have to go into that mode where the saturation is really aggressive. Now, the EQ part is also a saturator. So if you apply temp to the EQ, now whatever you're boosting, you're saturating that area. If you're attenuating, you're unsaturating the area. So there's an interaction that happens between the EQ portion and the temp or cook, or both of them, which are the coloration functions and the saturation. And once you apply the temp to the equation of the EQ, then now it's a saturation EQ, which is different than the EQ on its normal way of working, because now you're introducing other harmonics to the picture.
And I think that's very interesting that this is a processor that's going to sound significantly different in cut and boost mode, because you're applying more saturation in boost, less saturation in cut. And I think that's really kind of an intuitive way of going. And the frequencies that you want to reduce, you're not applying as much saturation to them, but the frequencies you want to enhance and bring out, that's where you're adding potentially some more of your colors. So I think that's a cool thing of the design here. And to me, I've got to tell you, Maor, the layout strikes me almost like a guitar amp layout, where it's very broad, it's very intuitive, it's made for people who just want to go in there and be musical without thinking too much about numbers. So you've definitely succeeded there. Next big question I want to ask you, for those who haven't tried it.
Wait. You said something interesting. You said about guitar amp.
Yes.
I want to touch that for a second. Okay, sorry to cut you off. Okay, don't take it personally. It's exactly what you're thinking, and I'll tell you why. When we were younger, and some of us are older, but when we go to a rehearsal space, for example, and let's say we're not sound engineers, where is the only place where we play sound engineer? When we tweak the amp, right? Like, I want more mids, I want more lows, right? So Intuitively, we think of that range. Even as a bass, I'm a bass player originally. So what's the first thing I do when I connect the bass to the amp? I tweak the knobs, right? So you don't have to be a sound engineer to tweak the knobs to your liking. Yeah. The oven is set up exactly like that. It's intended for you to go in and like, oh, I want a bit of that, a bit of that. No technicality. Just the same way you go to your, big amplifier of guitar or big amp for bass, you do the same thing. Intuitively, you move the knobs. You don't know exactly where the presence knob is, the treble, the bass. You don't know. But you know that when you move it, you get a result.
And you're forced to listen too, which is nice. So I like this idea that you're forcing people to use their ears, think more musically, more creatively, more like musicians, or at least turn off that technical part of our brain some of the time. I think that's why so many people are having so much fun with this. So just a couple quick tips from you, if we can get them. Now, first of all, if you want to see Maor do a deep dive with this plugin, and producer Bob Horn as well, we got a couple of great demos and walkthroughs right here on the Plugin Alliance channel. Be sure to check those out. We'll link to them in the description here as well. But just for someone who's listening to this, not checking out the walkthrough, wants to just dive into it for themselves, try out the demo on the Plugin Alliance website, how would you recommend that they start off by using this? What are the best knobs to move first? Do you have any general rules of thumb for how to get the best results out of the oven?
Okay, so let's say you're doing mastering or mixing, the first thing I suggest is putting the calibration mode in low. And then when you're hitting it, listen if you hear it like being squeezed. If it is, move the headroom knob to more. And then once it sounds clear and you feel there's a depth enhancement, because once you apply the oven, even if everything is in default setting, there is a sense of depth and some width. Not like crazy width, not like weird, but more of like a definition of a 3D feel. That's the point where you can start pressing, moving the knobs a tad, but don't go overboard in the beginning because each one is interactive. So I would start calibration low, move the headroom, see if you need more headroom or not. And then temp usually will bring things forward. And that's like an immediate effect. It doesn't require any tweaking on bass, mid, and high. That's an immediate thing. If you want to hear some like bloominess of the coloration of the tube kind of underneath it, raise the cook and bypass on bypass. And you'll notice it's kind of ear candy. Like you'll start pushing it more and more and more. And you have to bypass on bypass because it's really easy to go far with it because it's fun. It gives you this depth and size. The EQ portion, what's really cool about it is that if you just need to open up high end, just a tad like in the top, just move the sizzle. The sizzle is only going up. There's no minus. It just goes up on the knob. The top burner is the treble, the mid burner is the mid, the low burn is the lows. But each one of them has an A-B switch. And it changes how that knob works in terms of the frequency range and the spread of the frequency.
That's the burn type control you have for each of those, yeah?
Yes, the burn type. So on the low end, if you go to A, that's more the subs. If you go to B, that's more the upper bass, which reaches more of the low mid. In the mids, it's a very interesting knob because this can save you a lot of time if you need to have like more presence on the vocals, kind of like a vocal up version. You can just move the knob like 1 or 2, and immediately you'll see how the mid-range comes up, not in a honky, harsh way, but just it gives it a front feel. And you can toggle between A and B. A will be a bit more upfront, B will be a bit more like pulling up even more thickness. On the high end, again, you have the A and B, which will give you the upper range, not the super upper range, but the normal treble range. And then there's this switch called Bunsen. And that also applies to the guitar thing we talked, and that turns the treble to presence. So if you need now to get more grit out of something, let's say a piano, you need to hear more of the hammer. Guitar, you need to hear more of that edge of the pick. Vocals, you want to have that body of the upper range, but not the upper, just a bit more of the, let's say, mid to high mid section. When you apply that Bunsen, it turns the treble to presence and up, And again, you have A and B. So it's like you have four sounds. You have the normal A and B, and then with Bunsen, the A and B is like a C and D. So it gives you four tones to choose from. If you have a harsh track on the upper range, you can attenuate that high end and it will smooth a lot of that harshness, which if you want to compensate, you can also add in the sizzle, bring back some of that up. Same thing with the low end. If you have too much mud in the low end, you can put it in B and then subtract, attenuate one or two, and that can help you kind of tighten the low end, and then you can bring back the temp. By the way, those are tricks that I use on the hardware on music. Like I master with this, and these are some of the tricks I use for it. In the sizzle, you have two types of sizzle, A and B. B is kind of more open and spread. A is a bit more front and less open. In the temp knob, you have a low and high saturation. For mixing, I would consider low is the better way to work. Of course, you can always find a setting in high, but if you want to saturate harder, go to high and push it, and it will give you that. Cook is the tube section, and bake and broil is the voicing of the tube. Bake is more balanced. Broil is a bit more edged and tight. Electric and gas is the intensity of the tube. Usually, as a default, I would start with bake and electric because it's not pushing it as hard. But once you turn to gas, it's going to bring the tube very up front, and things are going to be like moving outside the speakers, even to the, like, you'll just feel it, like the bass, everything will be like, whoa, it's coming up. So it's really dependent on the program material for real. But just default, you can even play with the calibration mode if you want to have like a box tone change. Just move from low, mid, and high. And by the way, that only exists in the plugin. In the hardware, we have a continuous knob for the calibration for both left and right, so you can calibrate between left and right in the tubes. But in plugin world, we decided that there's some of this area is not needed, and we found 3 sweet spots that sound amazing, at least to my opinion.
Now, Maor, I know you've been able to try out both the plugin for yourself as well as the hardware. Tell me, in your honest opinion, how close were you able to get with the plugin compared to your original hardware?
Well, what was important for us is that we get the essence of the oven, because it's not an easy thing to emulate. There's no legacy to it. It's not something like that was before and there were different versions or clones or other companies making plugins of it that you can compare it to. So this was like what you call new territory. And we understand that, you know, there's ways to get there and limitations where analog is analog and it's going to be different, where a plugin can only get to a certain place. We were very picky, and anybody in the company can tell you we didn't make it easy on anybody. We really wanted to make sure that this is exciting for us. So, you know, I'm not going to lie to you, there is a difference between hardware and a plugin. There will be a difference because it's analog is analog, digital is digital. But we did get the essence of it, and we got what we really wanted to get in a plugin where you could apply this and get excited. That's what the hardware does for me. That's what the plugin does for me. They're different. And if you have the hardware and you have the software, you'll hear the difference. But you'll be happy with both, because both of them give you what you really wanted from the unit, and each one has their benefits. And just for the guys, the people who are using the plugin, there's features that the hardware doesn't have. Like the whole BX module, that doesn't exist in the hardware. We don't have in the hardware parallel, we don't have mono maker, we don't have stereo width. So there are benefits that the plugin can do, of course. Plus the fact that you can put it on any channel you want, any track. And you don't have to pay so much to buy a lot of hardware. But we are very happy, both Chris from Hendyamps and me, and we are very picky with our choices, and we don't just let loose because it's a plugin. We were like, we want this to be amazing, and if it's not amazing, it can't go out.
Very cool. And you've been talking a lot about the applications of the oven on mix bus and mastering and how you use it there. But clearly, that's not the only place where it's gaining fans. What are some of the other top places that people use the oven? And are there different ways of using it on different instruments?
I think one of the biggest uses besides mix bus and mastering, which is the huge amount of people using it, is drum bus. There are users of the actual hardware that have the hardware on the drum bus because they say that they don't need to compress much afterwards, and it just brings the drums up front, so they don't have to try to get the drums in the mix coming out. It makes that happen for them, so they don't compress or limit as much, and it brings the whole punch and impact forward. So that's one of the first thing I would recommend is, and actually the demo I did for Plugin Alliance was on a drum bus, and I think that's where it shines really amazing, because you can also take it further if you want to push the drums harder. Yeah, if you want to put a parallel bus to the drums, so you got to have so you have one that's full impact and one that has just the the articulation, and combine them, you can do that. Vocals sound amazing through this, especially the cook function, which is the tube, and the sizzle, which just opens up like this magic warm upper range. And of course, if you need to push things forward in the mix and the vocals are struggling because you're trying to EQ the hell out of it and still it's just not happening, put some on the mid, put some on the high, put the buns in on, and immediately it's going to push the vocals way forward. You're not going to struggle as much because the presence is already built up there. And cook is it's very subtle, but it gives that bloominess. Temp will also push it. Another good place to put it is bass guitars, because it can make bass guitar sounds like they were stacked, like layers, because what it does, it thickens it so much that even if you run a DI or an amp or both with that, immediately you're going to get like thickness. And if you add, you start with the temp, get to the point, and then add the cook underneath, like slowly till you feel that you get this 3D weight underneath. Gas works really good on bass because it really pushes it. And one of the cool usages is 808s, because it makes the sustain like boo, boo. It's like, I know I sound excited, but yeah, it's really cool. Like electronic music, just it makes magic on those things, and acoustic music as well, because even just adding the tube section. Oh, my dog now just did the so he did an 808 impression. Yeah, Pato, you're good at that, huh? Anyway, I don't want it to sound like a sales pitch, but you can put this on most instruments. I don't want to name a name, but I can tell you that one of the users told me that he used 180 instances of it, which were divided to 30 5.1 sections on orchestra.
Wow.
So that's impressive.
Very cool.
And it didn't move the needle. Yeah, you should try it on everything. I personally, I'm a mastering engineer, so of course it goes on my masters. But mix bus, drums, bus, snares can get very punchy and tight with this. Kicks as well. Bass guitars, vocals, 808s, acoustic guitars too. Only thing that it's not good on is, I think, on like samples from the Wildness. Yeah. Crickets don't sound good with it. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. That's the only thing yeah, it's like they just don't sound good when they're warmed up.
I believe it. You need to keep your crickets as pure as possible. Now, Maor, it's really great to hear you talk about this, because I can tell how excited you are about it after so many years of using the hardware. Still, And I really think the best thing that people can do at this point is go try it out for yourself. Go over to plugin-alliance.com where you can try out this or anything else they make for free for 2 weeks. Also, check out Maor's new demo and walkthrough right here on the Plugin Alliance YouTube channel and the one from Bob Horn as well. I think you get some great ideas and killer insights there. Try it mastering, try it in your mix bus, try it on drum bus, try it on vocals, try it on bass, try it on pretty much everything. I hope you have as much fun with it as Maor clearly has and as much fun with it as so many others are currently having. Pretty much the feedback I've gotten from everyone who's tried this is just you instantly get good sounds out of it without thinking, which I think is what Maor was going for. So hearing that kind of result from users in the field, I think has probably been really exciting for him. Also, let us know in the comments down below. I'm sure Maor is going to read them. If you like this, what did you use it on? What did you find to be the most effective or interesting ways to use this plugin? We want to hear about in the comments down below. Give it a shot and let us know what you think. Thanks for hanging out with us here on the Plugin Alliance channel. This has been Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop with Maor Appelbaum.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. It was a great pleasure, and both me and my dog had a good time. So enjoy working with the oven and cooking some good music.